It was me the whole time. So, today we get to start a new series called Bedtime Stories. And so I thought there could be no better place than to go into my own hideout from a fort and tell the bedtime stories. Now, bedtime stories are meant to lull us to sleep. In order to do this, the stories must be told in the exact same manner as they always have been. The prince saves the princess. The good guys win and the bad guys lose. The conflict resolves because the same hero always reaches his usually male goal. But what happens when, as one of my favorite poets wrote, in this one, the princess saves herself? The change brings the listener into the story through the expected, through the familiar, while creating a new ending. Just like the commercial we saw at the Super Bowl, retelling Rapunzel's story, our minds are ready for the predictable story of a beautiful woman passively waiting for her heroic prince. When passivity turns into agency, Rapunzel creates her own way out of no way, and the commercial ends with her liberation, creating room for many women to find their own space outside tower walls. The rereading of Rapunzel wasn't new for the sake of novelty. It wasn't change which ignored its own traditions. The rereading was drawing out of the shared inherited story of feminine passivity, then using it to trouble this story, offering a new way forward in light of the promised potential found when the princess saves herself. The rereading was offered because our larger community's experience began to trouble the ancient storytelling, demanding one which bore witness to the strength inherent within women. If the story remained closed, then it would not have been noticed. It is the expected. The expected utilizes the same strategies as bedtime stories, trying to promote some apathy and lethargy, causing us to drift off to sleep. A slow, faithful repetition which seeks to eternally replicate itself rather than reproducing life, creating a single tradition, a founding myth which repeats until it becomes absolute and unquestionable. Interrupting and troubling these narratives is the act of poetics. It's actively sitting between the inherited and the community. It's actively shaping the inherited because of what we have witnessed in the other, for the promise of a freer tomorrow. Now, naturally, we all say, yes, of course we should do this. That is, until our own bedtime stories are exposed and troubled, until we have to wrestle with the angst of waking up. Then the deviation creates panic because we already know how the story ends. It could be a terrible story, filled to the brim with misogyny, fear, violence, abuse, pain, and willful ignorance. But it is expected, so we can keep sleeping. Just don't change the narrative's cadence. Keep the characters in their place. We're almost back asleep. This is precisely what is happening as we enter into Luke 20. Jesus just entered Jerusalem in 19, and the people surrounding him shouted, "Blessed is the coming King, the one who comes in the name of the Lord." Everyone knows how this story ends, with Jerusalem replicating Roman power, drawing swords, and the only difference is it is our tribe rather than yours who gets to have power. Everyone knew how it ends, which draws the attention of the official keepers of the communities. It says the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, those who have power sway, those who are the repeaters of the stories, said to Jesus, "Tell us, by what authority do you do these things? Or who gave you the right to do such things?" Jesus, in response, tells a parable against them as terrible keepers of the community. So they seek to reinforce the status quo, sending spies in order to catch him in a statement, perform a citizen's arrest, and hand him over to the authorities. So they want to hear the new, the unsettling, said, "We know how to bring this into heel. We'll take them to the ones with swords." Thus, the litmus test questions began. The questions all communities have, where the insiders ask to vet the outside voices. Can I hear you? Are you good enough? Will come from litmus tests. If you don't recognize it, then just listen for a telling phrase. I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, and then enter a gaslighting point central to the old narrative. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, but if Rapunzel is released from her tower, who's going to watch the children? I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. But if we challenge traditional ideas of relationships, then will all anarchy break loose? I'm going to play the devil's advocate. Usually exposes the bedtime story. For the first century, they sounded like this. Is it right for us to pay tribute to Caesar? Now, mind you, this question's loaded, because to not pay is to incite war and revolution. And then the next one comes, and this time it's from the Sadducees. And the Sadducees are agents for the Roman state that are co-opting Roman power in order to be able to control their own area, wanting to show the absurdity of thinking a new way is even possible. Wanting Rapunzel to know her place, locked in the tower, was according to God's law and nature. They began playing devil's advocate. And now many scholars note the question they ask is one of gaslighting. It is a baited, sarcastic question meant to keep the story closed, contained. We already know all the endings possible. And they say, Moses taught that Rapunzel was owned by her husband. If she couldn't produce heirs while he was alive, then to honor his name, she was passed to the husband's brother until she produced an heir. Now just hear me out. What if this happened 7 times with no heirs? Who does her passivity belong to in resurrection? Since sex laws and nature says at this time that a man can have many wives, but a woman can only have one man, otherwise inheritance, name, and place are threatened. Jesus responds in 34 to 36. The people of this age are given in marriage those who are considered worthy to attain to the next age and the resurrection from the dead. Neither marry nor are given in marriage. They're like angels. This new ending, saying that those considered worthy opt out of marriage, and opting out of marriage effectively undid the entirety of ancient society, which was built on marriage, household, and tribes, and then ultimately to the entire political system of their known place. They said that Rome would fall apart if the households fell out of order. It defined loyalty and obligation. But what does it mean to be like an angel? To be perfectly honest, we don't know. Scholarship is split. It has a few ways it can be seen. It ultimately depends on how you construct the meaning or identity of an angel. For the first few hundred years, it was understood as becoming a person beyond the need for sex. A part of Christianity understood this as calling people beyond marriage, since once you're resurrected, you'll become male. After all, every angel in the Bible, so biblical angels, are all men. This also became a key text delimiting sex, even within marriage. Because sex showed we were not resurrected, it showed that we were rather trapped in this age. In current scholarship, Dr. Patricia Jung is offering a constructive theology in Sex on Earth as It Is in Heaven. And she highlights how every construction from this passage, every way of reading like angels, highlights how we see the story ending. In other words, it's called shaped by the eschatological, the end of all things. And this dictates how we read like angels. And she highlights that angel sex throughout the Hebrew Bible led to giants in the flood. In the Greek Old Testament, it led to the birth of demons. Towards the 1st century, they became sexless. She shows that whether we will have sex after the resurrection, like the angels, or we'll be sexless, like the angels in the 1st century, what proper sex is and how frequently it should be engaged in is always a matter of creation, construction, of a living poetics seeking to reinforce the bars or liberate Rapunzel from her tower. This is important because a lot of us were raised around concepts of traditional marriage or traditional sexualities. And yet, usually we're a little bit ignorant that most of the things we say are tied directly to the sexual revolution of the 70s. Because until that time, there were no books celebrating the joy of sex, while recommending married couples have as much and as erotic sex as possible. In Luke 20, this would have been a sign of being tied to this age, unworthy of the one to come. Jesus' words within the context of chapter 20 untie society's bonds in the first century so that they can recreate a new ending. In history, they were read as a call to a spirituality of continence, of delimiting sex as much as possible. Like even one of the church fathers said. He bragged that in 12 years he had sex 6 times, producing 6 sons. So he was trying to become as much like the angels as possible. So inside and outside of marriage, throughout Christian history, being tied to sexuality was seen through the lens of being like the angels. And so we delimited until you get to Martin Luther. Martin Luther starts opening the door for it. And then we come to celebrate and to big it up towards the late 70s Christian response to the sexual revolution was the 80s how to have the best marriage sex life possible explosion of books. So now, having a more positive view of sexual impulse, this, like angels, is read as a disembodied hope of heaven. So I cannot tell you which one to follow. I can only invite you into the act of rereading, of embracing the inherited text as the first words in a poetic, seeking to disrupt the bedtime stories that keeps us sleepwalking and Rapunzel trapped. If you think this is playing too fast and loose with a sacred text, just look at how Luke developed his own poetics when he wrote a sequel, the Book of Acts. Because for us, the biggest litmus test question is that which promotes the most gaslighting fighting, no matter if you're for or against, revolves around sexuality and the LGBTQIA plus community. We passionately argue from sacred text and our views of nature to name what good sex is. For most of the New Testament, it wasn't sexuality, but circumcision that divided everyone. A divine command given by the very mouth of God for all within the expanding community. Moses, their main lawgiver and teacher, was almost slain by God for not having his son circumcised until his foreign wife, walking with him, circumcises the child on the fly and throws the bloody foreskin at his feet and says, "I have saved you. Truly, you are now my husband of blood." Moses' life, their ultimate lawgiver, their first prophet, was saved through circumcision. Yet, even this divine rule, which almost killed Moses, spanning centuries, was open to change. As Acts 15:1 shows us, it says, "Some came from Judea teaching, 'You must be circumcised according to the law of Moses, or you cannot be saved.'" In other words, you cannot be a part of us. In response to seeing life in the wrong people, the apostles and some of the leaders gathered because they wanted to discuss, what do we do with the Gentile problem? What do we do with the uncircumcised? The leaders gathered to debate and witness to the new ending they're seeing because of the movement of God. They started from the text, saying, "As we've heard it said," but ended with a rereading that honored what they have witnessed in life together. Afterwards, they said what they witnessed could affect what their tradition knew to be absolute and true. They said it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to adapt our inherited tradition, to change our bedtime stories for your liberation and inclusion. Because all of us that would be within modern culture, save for the Jewish people, are only brought in because of this movement. It has always been this way, and it seemed good to God. You are invited into the Poetics of Phos. Beginning in the text is the first word, but ending in the new life witnessed by the gathered community. And this is the call of Poetics, seen in the very stories of God. Now, getting back to being like angels, we can ask, is this a call to have sex less, to become sexless, or a challenge to undo social systems in order to rebuild something that brings liberation to more kinds of humanity? I can't tell you absolutely. I cannot demand you read being like an angel the same way as me. But I can insist upon you that whatever it means must be developed together as new life is witnessed to by a community open enough to see it. And this seemed good to Jesus and the Holy Spirit as well.